Okay, so we're going to start off the lesson today talking about action potential. Probably one of the most important things for you guys to understand because it not only is in this, but it's also part of muscles. So during action potential, you start off being polar. So polarization, depolarization, repolarization. So let me say that again. So you start off polarization, depolarization, repolarization. During polarization, you've got potassium on the inside, sodium on the outside. You have a slightly negative charge inside versus slightly positive charge on the outside. The reason why, they're both positive ions, but you have more positive ions, more sodium than you have potassium. It's like a 3-to-2 ratio. So you just have, it's just a numbers game essentially. So again, at resting potential is polar because you have a slight negative, slight positive, slight positive charge. It's negative on the inside, positive on the outside. Potassium's inside, sodium's outside. Those are all things that you have to know, okay? So when action potential occurs, okay, so once this impulse goes through a neuron, all your sodium ions are going to start flowing in, okay? See the red sodium? They're going to go into the cell. That's going to flip your charges, depolarizing it. So now it's a slightly positive charge on the inside because you not just have your potassium ions, you also have sodium too. So all these positive ions is flipping the charge to make it slightly positive on the inside. Okay? Then after the impulse goes through, you're going to go back to resting potential and it repolarizes. Potassium will flip and go on the outside of it. Okay. Eventually everything will end up like this. It'll just go passively, go back to where it began. But just as a quick fix to get it polarized again, repolarized, potassium will flow out to make it slightly negative, slightly positive on the outside again. Okay, so again, knowing that you start off polar, dipolar, repolar, knowing where your ions are and knowing the charges. Very, very important. Okay, we'll do an activity to practice. Okay, so I really like this because you can actually see sodium going in, sodium going in, sodium going in, sodium going in. So polar, so start off polar, depolarization, depolarization, depolarization. This is action potential. So basically you have your dendrites, so we go through your dendrites, your soma, through your axon, and then at your axon terminal. Okay, when action potential goes up, so that positive charge that's inside, it will jump to another cell or a muscle, if there was a muscle here. Of course, you need a neurotransmitter to transfer before action potential can continue. Okay, so let's talk about our motor divisions. So you have central and peripheral. Central is your brain and spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system or your spinal and cranial nerves. You have 31 spinal, 12 cranial. You don't have to know the names of these, but we will review like what their function is. Okay, so lobes of the brain as a review, you have the frontal lobe. This is like thinking, planning, problem solving, emotions. The motor cortex is right behind that. You have your parietal lobe, that's spelling, math, perception, making sense of the world. Occipital is vision, and temporal is memory, understanding, and language. Here you can also see again frontal. The motor cortex is part of that, really. Body movement coordination, parietal, occipital vision, temporal would be like your hearing and your memory. Also, don't remember, you have midbrain. That's going to be for your eye movement. Your pons is sensory, and medulla oblongata. That's your heart, respiratory, and blood pressure. So that's what's making sure that your heart and your respiratory and everything is working optimal. Pituitary gland, which is your mastery gland. We'll go into that more. It's right here. Pituitary is right there. Okay, so just knowing the parts of the brain. So now let's get into peripheral nervous system. Okay, so your peripheral nervous system is split up into two different branches. So you have somatic, which is muscles. That means that your spinal, so the nerves are controlling a muscle. Autonomic is everything else. That's going to be like your smooth muscle, cardiac, glands, everything else. Okay, so somatic is muscle. Autonomic is all other glands, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, other things. So talking about the roots, so making sure that you know that you have when you're looking at your vertebrae, you have a dorsal root ganglion. It's right here, and the ventral. So this is front, this is back. Dorsal is back, ventral is front. You have your dorsal root ganglion, and you have your ventral root ganglion. So again, this is dorsal, this is ventral. So this is your dorsal root, your dorsal horn, ventral horn, ventral root. This would be your afferent. So this would be like your senses coming in. So you touch something, you feel it, you hear it, you sense it in some way. It would come in through the back, right? So it would come in from the dorsal root, dorsal horn, ventral root, and come back, and it would control your efferent after that. Okay, and this is another picture where you can see it. So you have your dorsal root, horn, ventral root, and it would come back. Okay, so that's, you can all see. And you have two on each side. You have one on each side. Okay, so, and again, just so you can see the whole thing, you have your receptor, sensory neuron or afferent neuron, your interneuron, efferent neuron, and it will control your effector organ. Okay, so this would be like the dorsal root, horn, dorsal root, or I'm sorry, ventral. So this is all ventral in the front. Okay, so now we're going to talk about your autonomic nervous system. So this is just talking about fight or flight, or parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay, so sympathetic, just remember, is like stressed out. You're stressed out, fight or flight, your pupils are expanding, your respiratory system increases, but your digestive system goes down. Parasympathetic, rest and digest, so your pupils will shrink, slow breaths, heart slows, everything slows except for digestion will increase. Okay, so remember during these, what you have preganglion, ganglion, and post. So in the preganglion, you're just saying where does it come from in the central nervous system. The ganglion is where there's a synapse. So in the synapse, you'll be moving some sort of neurotransmitter. And then your post-ganglionic neuron, you'll talk about like, how does it affect your effector? Like, what's it going to do? Slow it up, speed it down? What's it going to do? Speed it up or slow it down? Okay, so parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. Preganglion, so where does it come from? It's going to come from a lot of your cranial nerves, okay? So it's going to come from the oculomotor, facial nerve, glossopharyngeal, vagus, and it also will come from S2 through S4. You do not have to worry about like what it is like actually controlling, but just knowing like the actual names of the nerves and then S2 through S4, okay? The ganglion is ACH only. So the only thing, so again, like somatic, so during like in a muscle, there's just one neuron, but for autonomic, there's two. So when there's two, you have some sort of neurotransmitter. It's ACH in this instance. So right here, ACH should be transferred, ACH, 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 and then ACH will come right here. Okay. We'll talk later about like what it does to the organ together. So sympathetic is high stress, emergency, fight or flight, exercise. Those are all part of sympathetic. Okay, so preganglion comes from T1 through L2. So it all comes from T1 through L2. So not cranial nerves like before, it's just right here in the spine, T1 through L2. You have multiple, so you have acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So this right here is parasympathetic. So that's what we were rest or digest, just ACH. But for sympathetic, so fight or flight, you have ACH first, and then norepinephrine will be transferred at the end. So that's more specific, but just knowing that you have two neurotransmitters is good enough. The adrenal medulla is actually what produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, so that's the adrenal gland. So at the same time, ACH will go down the adrenal gland and will cause it to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream, and that will also help to activate. So not only are you like transferring, but you're getting more of it at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about how things are being controlled. So parasympathetic constricts, pupil are constrict. Your salivary gland is secreted because it's anything having to do with digestion is going to be activated. So any part of your digestive system, rest and digest. During sympathetic, your pupils will dilate, but you're not going to have mucus. You're not going to have digestion. Everything is going to the muscles. Everything's going to get you away from the predator. Okay, that's it. Sorry if that was a little fast, but that was a lot to kind of go through. And you will do some activities now.